On the 28th of October, Brazilian special forces launched a massive hammer and anvil type of operation against narco-insurgents entrenched on hilltop favelas. I know this is not the latest mission from Battlefield 6. The police operation involved no less than 2,500 officers, and as you can imagine, this resulted in a massive battle with an estimated 130 fatalities. This is unheard of before in Brazil, and some people I know participated in this operation, so we'll have an exclusive look at what actually happened. We will also go through this detailed battle map in a short moment. Look, I'm a bit autistic with maps, but this is truly fascinating. So I'll explain to you all the components of this map. As a result of this battle, Rio was in flames. Helicopters buzzing over the favelas. Towers of smoke filled the sky as traffickers set fires across the city, using them as barricades to block the police from entering. But these Brazilian cartels also made use of a new weapon: drones. That's right, these narcos used bomber drones against the advancing police columns. Now, despite this tactical success, as part of this information war, the mainstream media jumped on the story to trash security forces. Not the cartels, they're angels, they're victims. Here The Guardian reported this is the biggest police massacre in modern Brazilian history. They really framed the police as the bad guys, as if they just went into the favelas and started spraying. No, this was an actual battle. There were casualties on both sides. The Guardian is so dishonest, they even interviewed a mother that lost her son crying, "Murderers, murderers." It's a tragedy. Yes, no one can deny that. But her son fell with an AK in his hand, firing at the police. How about we start from the beginning? Rio de Janeiro was founded on March 1st, 1565 by the Portuguese explorer Estácio de Sá. Just kidding, this joke will never get old. Okay, let's just dive in. Here's a map of all the criminal factions in Rio de Janeiro, with their respective areas of control. You see, there's so many. Essentially, every favela is controlled by some sort of criminal faction. The one that interests us today is the largest one, the one in red marked as CV, for Comando Vermelho, or translated in English as Red Command. As you can see, they hold a lot of ground in Rio proper, at the center, and everything on the eastern outskirts of the city. You have to understand that this represents tens of thousands of heavily armed fighters. It's an army. Actually, let me tell you, when I drove through this São Gonçalo, it was so ghetto. It's hard to describe. You can just sense the danger. I mean, unless you're court cats, then you just enter. So what is the origin story of this Comando Vermelho? Here from Inside Crime we can read, the Red Command was born from an alliance between common criminals and leftist militants, when the two groups were thrown together in prisons under the military dictatorship that ruled Brazil from 1964 to 1985. Now you understand why they're called Red Command. And this alliance between the Brazilian left and these criminal factions still stands today. And this will become very important towards the end of the video. So in Brazil, instead of saying cartels, they will say criminal factions. In Rio, when I was invited to the base of the special forces of the police, they showed me a lot of videos. But from the videos I've been shown in person, these guys are barbaric. I've seen things I regret seeing. You understand? It's unimaginable what they're capable of. If you're interested, I made an entire video about my experience with Core, the Special Operations Police Unit operating in Rio. The link will be in the description below. Now, these factions are often described as narco-insurgents because they finance their activities through drug trafficking. Once again, to understand how they got to this point, I invite you to watch the video I made before. That's how in the early hours of the 28th of October, the governor of the state of Rio approved Operation Containment against the positions of the Comando Vermelho criminal faction located in the Complexo do Alemão and Complexo da Penha, two districts sitting at the heart of the city of Rio de Janeiro. If we go back to the map, it's this area in the northern part of the city, right outside the airport. In Brazil, everybody knows this neighborhood. It's been a criminal stronghold for decades. In total, these two favelas are home to no less than 100,000 inhabitants. It's an extremely dense urban area. Actually, let's jump on the 3D map. You can actually see the elevation of terrain, which turns the favelas into real citadels. You can see how there's barely any major roads going in and out. It's only small streets. Here in the south is the Complexo do Alemão. Literally in English, it's the favela complex of the German. The guy that bought the land in the 1920s was actually Polish. But for Brazilians, it's the same thing anyway. Oh yeah, funny story. One day at a bus station in Rio, I wanted to know where my bus was, so I start speaking English to the manager of the area, and the guy just cuts me off and says he does not understand the language of gringos, the language of the foreigners, as if all the foreigners in the world speak the same one language. Brazil in a nutshell. So, little advice, if you plan to go to Brazil, learn some Portuguese. So, back to the map. In red are the favelas that were targeted by law enforcement. The Complexo do Alemão in the south, and then the Complexo da Penha on the other side of the hill. Both are located on steep hilltops, and in between them there is a forested chain of even higher hills. Pure jungle. So this was the main battle space of the operation, with the focus on the northern part of it, the Complexo da Penha. The target of the operation was this 55-year-old guy named Doca, the leader of the Red Command of this area. We can read how he's responsible for many crimes and how he's being investigated for more than 100 homicides. The challenge was how intelligence data indicated how approximately 1,000 heavily armed fighters of the Red Command were defending this favela complex. 1,000. That's a lot of firepower. It's literally like in the movie Black Hawk Down. Now, because of that, a reported 2,500 police officers were involved in one way or another in this operation. In this mega operation, most of these officers were either attached to the civil police of Rio or the military police. Now, the role of 90% of this manpower was to lock down the favelas, create a security perimeter around it, and prevent any exit. It was essentially a siege. Now, the troops that will actually storm enemy positions and dislodge the criminals will be the highly trained special operations units such as the famous BOPI and their sister unit of the civil police, CORE, whose troops I had the honor to meet. But still, 2,500 police officers is completely out of the ordinary for Rio. In May 2021, the raid against Jacarezinho involved 200 officers, and the operation against the Complexo da Maré in August 2023 involved 600 officers. Okay, so here's the map of the latest operation from the 20th of October. You will recognize the forested hills north of the Complexo do Alemão, and how police forces formed the security perimeter around the Complexo da Penha, north of the hills. So let's go through this one by one. In green and purple, the 3rd and 41st Battalions of the Military Police of Rio. They covered the western axis of the operation. In orange, the Special Routes and Crowd Control Battalion covered the eastern axis of the favela. At the top, in blue, it says Incursion by the Civil Police of Rio de Janeiro. They acted as the main strike force and targeted the central nervous point of the Red Command in the Complexo da Penha, meaning the sectors of Via Cruzeiro and other sub-districts. They were supported by other shock units that pushed from the eastern side of the favela, but whose role once again was mostly of containment. The main assault came from the north from this civil police, and it's the guys from CORE that spearheaded the assault with about 120 operators. That means almost everyone from the unit was involved. They're specialized in CQB in heavily urbanized environments filled with civilians. And this is what makes them different from military units. They're also specialized in population control, and the role is also to arrest suspects. And it's not something easy to do in such environments filled with a hostile population. So the teams of CORE advanced in the early hours of the day, when the criminals are still sleeping. Their mission was to break through enemy barricades and push uphill as quickly as possible. That way they could arrest the main suspects they're looking for, but also secure all the weapons and ammo caches that are hidden across the favela. In this footage you can see another special operations unit of the civil police, the DRFABF. So they came as a second wave, pinning down the narcos and outflanking their positions. So all this to say that the civil police acted as the hammer of the operation. The anvil aspect was enacted by BOPI, the infamous spec ops of the military police. Somehow, I don't know the details, they infiltrated 120 of their operators right on the hilltops behind the Complexo da Penha. This alone is a masterpiece. Now you have to remember that the people in front of them are called narco-insurgents, highly militarized narcos, but narcos above all. So the fighters don't have a cause to die for. They want to stay alive and continue making money. so there will rarely be a last stand. The troopers of these criminal factions will fire at the police from prepared positions and cause as much damage as possible, but ultimately their goal is to flee and avoid being captured. Another primary mission of these cartels is to prevent the police from getting their hands on their weapons and drug caches. All this has to be evacuated and emptied before law enforcement gets there. To cover their withdrawal, they will start putting up these barricades, start burning cars and pre-positioned barrels to obstruct the view of helicopters and of the advancing columns. The helicopters are effectively blinded, and they're the ones that coordinate operations. For example, here you can see how the fighters from the Red Command engage the police through these prepared firing positions with holes just big enough to let the rifle through. You also have barricades made up of railway tracks solidified in cement to block any vehicles. These require special engineering squads to punch through. Now imagine doing this under enemy fire. Now again, all these stratagems are extremely coordinated and done on purpose to slow down police forces for everyone to be able to run away. In retaliation for the operation, other Red Command detachments launched drones that dropped grenades and explosives to target various police units in Rio de Janeiro. Now I've been told that something that happens a lot is that as the narcos run away, they blindly fire their rifles either above their shoulder or around corners. And it works really well with high caliber weapons that will pin down the police. However, this often leads to severe civilian casualties. Collateral damage, you know? But they don't care, even if it's their neighbors, it's always going to be blamed on law enforcement. So Kore dismantled the barricades one by one. Then came the second wave of the civil police, with arrest warrants and search and seizure warrants in their hands. As always, this pushed the fighters from Red Command to flee towards the hilltops, through trails and little paths. Let me tell you, I was on such trails in one of these favelas and it's pure jungle. If you don't know the spot, you can actually get lost. And yeah, that's when the narcos must have been ambushed by Boppy, the anvil part of the operation. It was deadly. Dozens upon dozens of its members were smoked right there. But then, what happened is that many of them then ran down, back into the favela. And that's when they were caught in crossfire by the Hammer, the operators from Kore that were pushing uphill. It was a Brazilian version of the Battle of Cane. In the end, those that avoided this deadly trap simply surrendered en masse. 113 suspects were captured and detained by the police. In total, 230 KIA or captured for the Comando Vermelho, 23% losses in one day from that sector, and approximately 100 rifles were seized. Here's a sample: lots of AR-15s, AR-10s, some FN Falls, 3 AKs, and I can even see a Beretta RX-4 Storm. These are all military-grade weapons. As a result, these criminal factions often outmatch regular police units in firepower. The operation cost the lives of 4 police officers, 2 Boppy operators, 42-year-old Sargento Clayton Serafim Gonçalves, 17 years of experience, and 39-year-old Sargento Heber Carvalho da Fonseca. Both were mortally wounded. This must have happened on these hilltops where there was heavy fighting. There was also 34-year-old Rodrigo Veloso Cabral from the Special Investigation Team and 51-year-old Marcos Vinicio Cardoso de Carvalho. The tragedy is that he had been promoted to head of investigations at the 53rd Police Station just one day before the operation. As part of the aftermath, Governor Castro said, "This is how the real police are treated by criminals, with bombs dropped by drones. This is the scale of the challenge we face. This is not ordinary crime, but narco-terrorism." Hence the term narco-insurgents that we talked about earlier. Now, of course, Brazilian President Lula, the champion of the left, was astonished and also expressed his surprise that the federal government had not been informed beforehand. And let me tell you, there's a reason why they have not been warned beforehand. Look, I cannot say more than that. What can be considered a brilliant tactical success was quickly turned into outrage by many news outlets and human rights activists that openly protect these criminals. This is the information war that takes place after the battle. ICL Noticias reported, "It is becoming increasingly evident that the fruitless and bloody war on drugs is the main pretext used by the political and economic elite to cleanse a population." That's right, they pull out the racism card. Other news outlets speak of a large-scale execution. In English, The Guardian said this is the biggest police massacre in modern Brazilian history. The BBC reported many of the bodies had reportedly been retrieved from a nearby hillside, where police said most of the deadly clashes had unfolded. This is where they took the bodies from all the fallen criminals and lined them up side by side in a perfect line, all covered up so you don't see who it is, to also camouflage the fact that they're all military-age males, and then they invited all the journalists. You can see on every picture of this event, everybody has a camera. In conclusion, law enforcement in Rio is not only fighting the criminal factions, the narcos, but they're constantly targeted by the mainstream media, which depicts them as murderers. In turn, the Brazilian judiciary will consistently put sticks in the wheels of the police, especially for the elite backups units like BOPE and CORE, and essentially force them to a standstill. For example, any operation will have to go through so many bureaucratic layers that by the time it's approved, it's already too late. That's all I have for you today. See you in the next one.